Oh, we're up. Excellent. So thank you for coming along. This session is going to be talking about supply chain resilience. Apologies to anyone who's a software supply chain person. I'm going to be talking about the less technical aspects of supply chain resilience. Hopefully you'll get something to take away from it though, if that's where your interests are. But yes, as Amber said, my name is Adam Selwood. I'm the founder and managing director at a company called Cinch Security. We've been helping since about 2018 a lot of small businesses. In fact, I've worked with a couple of thousand small businesses at this stage, all across Australia, in conjunction with a lot of our enterprise partners who inevitably need to work with them. Prior to starting Cinch, I was at Australia Post as a security architect, so I'm now a recovering security architect on a mission to try to help small businesses stay secure and engage in the economy. This session is going to be talking about the difficulties, primarily drawing on lessons that I've learnt on both sides of the relationship whenever there's a small business involved. But again, all of the lessons here, hopefully there'll be some stuff you can take away and use, just generally speaking, whenever you're working with anyone, where there's in particular a bit of mutual relationship and responsibilities going on. Before we start though, let's talk about the current state or the standard approach to supply chain assurance and resilience and management. And I like to think of that as the PvP or play versus play mode. Typically, and before we get started, who here participates as someone who sends out questionnaires? Excellent. Thank you all for your service. And who here receives said questionnaires and needs to respond to them? Yes, probably a few more. So a lot of what we're going to go through is very relevant to pretty much everyone in the room, which is excellent. But typically what we see is that it's a little bit adversarial. You know, those that have the questionnaires and those that respond to the questionnaires, it can be quite confrontational at times. Often if you're particularly a small supplier, you get to this mythical castle in the mountains that you need to get to, and there's just walls up. You don't know how to navigate through this. It's a convoluted, there's magical incantations about ISO 27001 and Essential 8 and IRAP and all sorts of secret passages you don't really understand yet. There's questions about, what we talk about today, quantum and all sorts of other things that seem completely irrelevant to you. And maybe even at times you'll have questions that refer to internal documentation that you can only get to when you're on the other side of the walls. It's all sorts of weird and wonderful things going on. And it's quite difficult to navigate and quite confronting when you hit this for the first time as a smaller supplier. And for those of you in the room that have sent out these questionnaires, the reality on the other side of this is sometimes it just feels like a bit of a facade. It's like we ask all these questions, we get all these responses back, and unless you're Microsoft or Anthropic or something other than that, you give your response and your assessment back to the organisation, and then someone in the business accepts the risk. Or potentially they go onto a backlog. Or potentially they get put into tier 3 and you just kind of pretend that they don't exist for a little while and it sort of grows. Also, it just happens point in time. Maybe it's only ever happened when they came on as a contractor. They've been with you for years and years and years. Or maybe it comes up again in renewal time. But really, sometimes it just feels like we're having to go through the process. It's quite slow. It can be quite resource intensive. And it's just not really adapted, and it's a bit of a box-ticking exercise at times. Certainly those in the business often feel that, and I can guarantee that those in the supply chain who are actually responding to these things definitely don't understand why they're getting put through the ringer in this way. In fact, those of them that have gotten to the point where they're getting the questionnaires, for many, many, many of them have died along the road on the way to get there. And often this is where we find them, or they find us. So they've gone out, they've hit this point, they've responded to a questionnaire, they've put all this effort and work into actually getting a deal and working with a large organisation, and then they get slapped with a couple of hundred questions that they don't understand, and they put it down to that. And they run into the hands of the magical ISO consultants out there that can help them through the process, only to get completely blindsided with costs and all the other bits and pieces. So this is standard, traditional. Hopefully this is not what all of you are experiencing today, and we're moving past this. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is what I call the co-op mode playbook, which is basically 8 steps and things that we can do across this process and beyond this ecosystem to try to make this a little bit more manageable and easy to engage with and move forward on. All of the steps in here, in all honesty, there's probably a lot of this you're already doing in bits and pieces, or some stuff really well. Maybe there's things in here, hopefully, that you haven't thought about yet that you could take back with you. But ultimately, they all sort of contribute and work together to make life a lot easier for everyone involved. And whilst they can take a little bit of thinking, they don't necessarily need to take a lot of investment or time or effort. Really, my goal here is to get rid of everyone's backlogs. We've all got backlogs. We don't want them to exist anymore. We want to be managing that risk and ultimately enabling the ecosystem and all of these small innovative businesses that we want to be working with. So step one on our journey in the playbook is the old standards and guidelines. We love a standard and we love a guideline and a framework in cyber. It runs the engines of the cyber ecosystem. This is something that is unavoidable. Often they get imposed onto you as a large organisation, and therefore you need to then pass them on to the smaller organisations. This is completely appropriate and necessary and makes life easier for everyone involved. The hard part is that we're not always transparent. It's not always obvious as a supplier engaging with you for the first time what your standards and guidelines are. So my first suggestion to think about, something to consider, is how do you publish or make public the standards and guidelines and the expectations that you have for your suppliers. Make it out there, and so before you even engage with them or become aware that they exist, they can self-select and go and find that and start preparing it and readying themselves to work with you. For bonus points, if you're particularly keen and you really want to engage and embrace small innovative businesses, I would encourage you to think about potentially putting in place some tailored guidelines and standards and whatnot for them. There are some interesting ones. There's SMB 1001 is a new recent emerging standard that's kind of a precursor to things like ISO. Have a think about that. Maybe consider actually introducing those things and making them available. And again, directing and making visible that these are things that you should be aware of and across before you start working with a larger organisation. On the other side of that, once you become aware of a smaller supplier or someone that your organisation might be interested in partnering with or having a relationship with, run a pre-flight check. So a lot of us, when we get these big backlogs, we're starting to use a lot of these tools where they'll go out, run a bit of a posture scan, give you a score, and you'll get something out of 1,000 or an A+ or a D-, whatever it might be, some sort of a mechanism to understand the relative security posture of an organisation. These are really good. They're fantastic tools. And what I would suggest that you want to be trying to do here is assign a traffic light. The other thing in cyber, we like traffic lights and standards, right? This is the key thing. Well, the business likes traffic lights. But what we want to be thinking about in particular, who are those organisations that are green lit, they're going to be really, really mature and easy to work with, they're going to be pretty painless? Who are those ones that are red flags, we don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole unless we really have to, and then there's going to be a big swath of organisations in the middle. The better you can get at externally discovering and figuring out using all these OSINT tooling and all those sorts of other bits and pieces, which ones fall into which categories, the better it's going to be for you later when you start to think about how is this going to be and what's the process and how painful is this organisation going to be to work with. Really key insight that you can use later and also just to help you to prepare and your organisation to do that. Again, bonus points for this one, if you can arm your organisation and the business stakeholders with this type of information, so that when they're out looking around and actually having a conversation with a vendor, potentially they can be pre-armed and aware that if they choose to go forward, there's some dragons down the road that you're going to have to face. So something to think about, use those pre-flight checks, get proactive even before you've actually formally engaged. The more the merrier for this type of thing. If you have a formal expression of interest process and an exercise, it's a practice that people go through, think about how you can tune that out and make that a little bit more approachable and friendly to smaller organisations. If you don't have a formal practice or process, just think about those first interactions and that step where you're actually introduced to a small organisation. How are you going to make life just a little bit more approachable and friendly for them? Because when you're a small organisation, if you've ever gone through the process of responding to a government tender, there's all this stuff out there, and security questions will be one of them. Often the one that you ignore until you get to the very end of the response and you freak out because you haven't actually thought about this and don't understand what's being asked. So ideally you want to be thinking about, again, making this a little bit friendlier, how can you actually frame this up and prepare the organisations to go through that? That EOI team, if you have a team that's doing that, procurement practice and process, arm them with mechanisms and different FAQs and whatnot that they can use to actually streamline and help people going through here too. Something to consider in this space would be something I call a post-assessment review, a little bit like a post-incident review. Actually look back at and think about how were the responses that we got, are there improvements we could make through this process, how could we tune this out to make, again, it more or less painful for those involved. Equally inside, because your organisations and your stakeholders are really not enjoying this process either, and potentially you aren't. So how do you make your life easier, but also for those that are responding, what changes or tweaks or things can you adopt to go through there? One of the key inputs for this type of process in your guidance, ideally what you want to be thinking about are what are those not negotiables, what are those blockers? A lot of these questionnaires, and this is where your questionnaires usually get surfaced and thrown out there, they'll start with, do you have ISO certification? When you're a small supplier and you see that, a lot of them will just self-disqualify themselves. They'll hit that, not understand what that is, feel that that's a barrier for them progressing, and they'll rule themselves out. So if you can be a little bit clear and upfront about the fact, now it may be a not negotiable for you, and that's fine, just be clear about that. If it isn't a not negotiable, just maybe frame that up and just say, this is not necessary, but it will help you if you have this type of thing moving forward. So just be a little bit upfront and give a little bit of guidance, and again, hold people's hand through this process. It can be quite useful. One thing that we find is really, really challenging in these types of interactions is ultimately clear lines of communication. A small organisation or someone who's supplying your organisation, even the big ones, they'll typically have some sort of a representative internally or a business stakeholder that they're working with that's helping them to navigate through and close the deal and get into your organisation. Ultimately, you though want to be able to connect and communicate and work with them. Now you probably already have very clear lines of communication with the likes of Microsoft or any other large technology vendor that you might be using, AWS and so on. One thing to think about is how could you potentially have the same sort of relationship or make sure that your business or your organisation has very clear lines of communication and understands how to get feedback and go on. This will become really important later, but if you haven't established and clarified both for your internal stakeholders, but also the organisations externally that you're working with, how questions can be asked, feedback can be given, ultimately clarifications can be sought, that could be a real blocker for you to move forward. And possibly the most important thing in the communications, if you are choosing to and you wish to work with smaller organisations, is to try to use plain language. Try not to use technical jargon if at all possible. Try to, again, make things a little bit easier to navigate and a little bit more approachable. Now, again, you may not wish to work with many small businesses. They are painful. They can be hard to work with. But if you aren't given the choice, or if you're like me, you just are a sucker for punishment and you like to work with small businesses, then plain language is key. You need to work with them. The reality is that on the other side, it's unlikely that you've got a security professional. Best case scenario, you've got someone who works in IT. More likely, you've got a business development manager or an operations manager. Someone who understands their business and what they're doing. They've got no idea about security, and ultimately, the more that you can make it easy for them to understand what your expectations and needs are, the better it will be for them, and the easier it will be for them to actually meet those expectations. Your requirements and obligations are not wrong. They are entirely valid and appropriate. They're just completely misunderstood because they don't understand the language that we're using 9 times out of 10. Now you've found yourself, you've red lit or you've given an amber light to a supplier. They've come through the process. They've gotten through the EOI gates. You're at that final BAFO moment, the old best or final offer. And before you get there and sign contracts, they're just not cutting the mustard. They haven't met your expectations, and everyone understands this. Being open to and being in a position where potentially you could work with them to establish a remediation roadmap is going to be a really key enabler for you to meet the business's requirement to be able to work with that organisation for whatever reason they might have. Again, back at the start, we spoke about people bypassing, accepting risk, and so on and so forth. This is a mechanism, if you can put in and agree to some remediation roadmaps, This will help you to manage that risk going forward and get some visibility onto it. Really think about, though, if you go down this path of doing remediation roadmaps, two key points to think about. One is, at what points are you checking along the process that the remediation roadmap has actually been implemented? If you just agree to that and then disappear and don't have a gate where you can come back, potentially before a go live or some sort of a release or whatever it might be, have a think about how you're going to do that. Otherwise, they will just end up on the backlog, and in all likelihood, no penalty, they'll not necessarily resolve or fix those issues that you need them to. The other key thing to think about here, apart from just making sure that that's there, is to make sure that the suppliers themselves have got enough time to plan and validate that they can actually deliver the remediation roadmap. So they can agree to it, but if they've already signed the contract, they're just probably going to go forward anyway and bring risk to your organisation. So ideally, you want to give them enough time to resource that, plan for that, and make sure that they've been able to update their offer in considering those types of remediations that may need to be put in place. Again, that may need a little bit of time, but hopefully just sequencing that and thinking about how you can plan accordingly can be actually quite useful in getting things over the line and managing that risk and building that resilience. If you find, and you'll see me in here because this is typically where I play, if you find that there's a supplier in there that you just have to do business with, there's no choice, you have a remediation plan, but they're clearly just not in a position to actually go off and implement and put all of those things in place. Something to consider is sponsorship arrangements or mechanisms for you to fund or assist them to do that. Now, I'm aware there are some government departments around who are pretty good at this type of thing. They will bring in a small business, they'll work with them to uplift and mature, and that's a fantastic arrangement. I'd love to see more and more of this out there. The reality is that the security and IT ecosystem out there, it's very expensive, very convoluted, and very difficult for a smaller supplier to actually navigate and find a good fit. So potentially, if you do have a lot of this, you may want to consider working with and sponsoring and actually giving a lot more support, a bit more hands-on stuff to those suppliers that you're working with. Now, if you get to this point, you've probably, hopefully, what you've found is that you've got some really clear understanding on both sides of the relationship. Your expectations are being met, and if they're not yet there, they're on the path to doing that, and you've got confidence that they're going to get there, right? And everyone's on board. At this point, you've got a pretty well-managed relationship with the supplier, and you should reward yourself if you're doing all of this stuff. This is really fantastic, and a credit to you and your teams. That said, things change, right? So just because you've signed the contract and everyone's on board at that point in time does not mean that in 1 month, 2 months, 2 years, at some point in time in the future, things aren't going to shift around, and you're going to need to manage that in some shape or form. Now, it could be that something's changed on their end. It could be that something's changed in your business on your end, or it could be that the threat actors out there are just doing things differently, using AI, quantum's been broken finally. All of this stuff is going to happen. There will be something that shifts. So keeping an eye on and continually monitoring around your suppliers and keeping an eye on the things that are going on, both for them and you and the general ecosystem, that threat intelligence piece is really key and foundational to managing the resilience of those relationships moving forward. The good thing is, if you're already doing pre-flight checks, you've got good tooling and platforms that you can use to kind of keep an eye on and have visibility on things. What then to think about, though, is, okay, will you see something? Well, first of all, are you going to be notified that there's something of interest or a problem that needs to be fixed? And even if there was, have you got a way to notify or engage the supplier to get it fixed? Are there commercial things in your contracts where you can go back and say, you actually have to respond and do this? This as well is if you're actually continually monitoring and doing, and depending on your processes and the questionnaire platform, if you're using that, or how you're sending out your spreadsheets, you may actually want to throw in, say, an AI adoption questionnaire. It was very interesting at B-Sides Melbourne last weekend. Vic Rhodes were talking about they've thrown out an AI adoption questionnaire, and they're looking for people who haven't yet adopted AI, really curiously. Because if they haven't adopted AI, they're probably not mature or thinking about the risk associated with that, so that becomes a red flag for them. and they start to manage and work with those suppliers to make sure that they're prepared and ready for the impending doom that AI is going to bring them. So have a think about that. There's lots of opportunity, but realistically, the annual assessments is far too long a gap nowadays. Things move way too quickly for that. So we need to be doing it, if not monthly, really we need to be aiming for daily, right? It's like that's the sort of time frame for certain things that we need to be managing and keeping an eye on. Beyond the continual monitoring stuff as well, again, think about how you're going to be engaging and communicating. The Optus 000 incident last year was a little bit of an interesting use case where just the email inboxes changed and people weren't notifying or understood how to communicate cleanly. And so as a result of that, they just didn't notify about the outage and it wasn't particularly managed well, and there's fines and all sorts of bits and pieces. Same challenge and difficulty with your suppliers. They need to understand how to notify you. You need to be able to notify them. And really, really, I can't stress this enough. The worst time for you to introduce yourself to one of your suppliers is in the middle of a data breach where you need them to respond and be acting and working and collaborating with you. So if you've got a mechanism to put in place some relationships and build that up over time and actually help them to understand and be comfortable communicating with you and expect and know what to do if you notify them, but really importantly, be comfortable notifying you, right? If there's something that's going on in them, you actually, contractually, they're supposed to notify you in a lot of instances, but more often than not, they don't actually realize that, and it's certainly not practiced. So create opportunities and think about how you can keep that communication ongoing. Now, this doesn't have to be you and your assurance team or GRC team or whatever it might be. It could just be working with those business representatives to do that. Or another idea that we've been road testing a little bit lately is working with, say, your internal security awareness team and thinking about a supplier awareness initiative, essentially going out maybe a quarterly or an annual type briefing that they can get that kind of updates them. If we go back and we think about all the things that we're monitoring for and that we're looking for in our teams, do not assume that your suppliers have any idea that any of that is going on. So help them to become aware and give them visibility of that sort of stuff. It gives you excuses to engage and continue to exercise those relationships and communication paths. So that's the playbook as a whole. Try to keep it short and tight. We've got lunch coming up, so I won't drag you on too long. But just in reflection on that, the traditional approach to doing supply chain assurance and managing these relationships is quite adversarial, and ultimately it's leading to just ever-increasing and growing backlogs. I hate backlogs. There's hundreds, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers that haven't been touched or looked at or assessed or responded to questionnaires in years. Right? These things just grow because they're in the third tier of our tiering model. Microsoft get looked at every other day, right? But these guys down here, they're just left to languish. The excuses for just leaving them there are getting removed from us, so we're having to go back, but we're trying to do that in a way that's just the big hammer that gets sent to nail, right? Thinking about and being a little bit more flexible and adaptive to that pain point and those relationships is really powerful. And really, really importantly, it creates stronger relationships, enables your business, and this is one key takeaway. I skipped this a little bit earlier, I should have touched on this, but why do we want to work with small businesses or smaller organisations in particular? It's because not only are they just the heartblood of Australia and they keep the economy going over, but ultimately this is where the innovation is going to come from, and this is where it is nothing quite as rewarding as helping and lifting up a small business and enabling the ecosystem. If we have a diverse network of suppliers, that creates competition, innovation, and enables us to be better. So if you can do that your little bit, make life a little bit easier, accommodate and give them the space to work with you in your organisation, ultimately you'll be helping the entire nation, and that's something that I'm very keen to see. Here it is on a page. That's my LinkedIn QR code if you're looking for that. I'm very easy to follow. I'm just the shorter Adam Selwood that doesn't play football. Yeah, at that point, we'll leave any questions. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for running us through that. We currently don't have questions working in the app, so you do need to pop your hand up and I will run the microphone down to you.
It's a bit afraid everyone's supply chains are all good.
Thank you for that. Really easy to follow. In the context of getting started with supply chain management and introducing the concept of cyber to them, can you talk at all about how to get the ball rolling with suppliers that are already well established in the business and are not used to the concept of cyber?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's the hardest part is introducing. So always have to come at it from the perspective of the why. I mean, I left it right till the end, right? Like why are we asking this question? So, because that's the first question they're gonna ask themselves, right? So try to help them appreciate and understand, even if it's a regulatory obligation that's been imposed onto you, just help them understand that. You wanna come at it as a collaborative thing, right? And so it's equal parts, explain the why. Don't get stuck into the, you know, here's the specific 15 questions or specific things that I need you to implement. They will do that as long as they appreciate the why and they feel that you are there in a supportive capacity, right? It's like, we're gonna help you on that way. We're not just gonna throw this thing at you, just dead cat this thing over and expect you to deal with it. And, oh, by the way, the contract that your entire livelihood and all the, you know, the payroll that you need to pay next week is stuck on this thing. Try to be a little bit gentler. And just say, these things have changed, right? The world has shifted and moved. We've got AI, we've got all these other bits and pieces. We have these new regulatory obligations. We want to work with you to make sure that you're able to continue to work with us. And so here's our why. Your why is you want us to continue to pay you, presumably, or something else. How can we help, right? Go in there with a more of a collaborative approach. So the specifics and bits and pieces, then they will help. They will be able to communicate, ideally, with you what they need. So they could be, yeah, no worries, our guys are on top of that. Oh, we were already ready to go. It may not be a non-issue. Or they might go, oh, why now? You've never asked me this before, what's all of us? Then you can have it, you know, be a little bit open to collaborating. Obviously, that sort of thing depends on how far you want to take that. It can be burdensome. And the smaller suppliers, I do not want to downplay how difficult it is to work with smaller suppliers. They are really, really challenging. So yeah, but if you approach it in that way, explain the why, give them the rationale for that, and be supportive, and then you'll kind of find the answers. They'll give them to you.
I guess I had a question on the opposite extreme. So I understand the challenges of working with small businesses. I guess my question was, have you seen any examples of what good looks like when working with larger organisations? So I think something we kind of see is, you know, a regulatory change or something will come out, a risk and security team will come up with this great big huge questionnaire, choose a whole bunch of modules in UpGuard, request evidence, and it's like, well, the amount of time that is consumed just trying to pull that together versus, okay, what are your non-negotiables? And actually,
yeah, I think it comes all the way back at the start, right? You can run your UpGuard assessment and get your score, and in all likelihood, they probably ticked all your boxes. Like, the only reason that you would need something else, the big players out there probably already have the reports you can ingest. I think in the industry, I didn't touch on it in here, but there's this emergence of trust centres. Is everyone sort of familiar with what a trust centre is? As a smaller vendor or a smaller supplier, and the original trust centres were like your Microsoft compliance centres and other bits and bits. They'll publish all the reports and give you all the answers to all the questions you could ever really ask, right? Presumably. Trust centres has become what people think of as a shortcut in the sort of technology vendor or even in the smaller organisation perspective. They feel that it's a shortcut to getting those deals with the larger vendors. What they kind of don't realise is that in the larger organisation, you don't have time or the inclination or the ability to go and consume their trust centre. So you're still going to send them the 200 questions and they're still going to have to answer the 200 questions. That's kind of the standard. I would love to see trust centres play a bit of a role there. So if you can green light them, you've done your own checks, you kind of understand that they're reasonably safe and mature. Realistically, it comes down to your tiering model internally, what the risk is that they represent to you and how far you need to take that. If you can scope the risk down to be really manageable, then you may actually just be able to take their trust center, right? It's like, okay, well, I've cited this ISO cert, at least they have some practices. I know there's, diligence we still need to do well beyond that. That's why we ask all the questions. But really just introduce them at the right moment in time. So potentially, again, thinking about a release plan, when do certain things need to be done. So it could happen in parallel. It doesn't necessarily need to be a gate up front that prevents the business from progressing and moving forward. But yeah, I think the large organisations, they're probably fine in most circumstances. They can answer your questions. You can get that. Realistically though, if you can adopt and just use an existing standard or framework, that'll streamline a lot of your requirements in that space. There's a bit of a cottage industry of supply chain assurance questionnaires. We all have our special flavour of the things. Part of my business is just translating all of that and mapping them all together, right? It's like there's lots of that type of stuff out there. So yeah, pick a standard, be upfront and directionally in that way, and then just treat the exceptions where needed, right? Just be very clear with the organisation on where that is going to happen. Hopefully that answered the question. I don't know if that...
Yeah, thank you.
Just down the front.
I'm just curious about the actual application of these steps.
Yep.
For some context, I work at a company and we've got a lot of different departments and everyone always gets pitched a new product that's going to solve all of that department's problems.
Understood.
And brings it through to us to
Yes.
have a look at. With the pre-flight checks you were mentioning and the guidance, would you say that it's good to have internally published so that our
100%. That's exactly
Yeah.
why I put that there, for that exact use case.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when my people come to me, I can be like, have you checked that vendor does these non-negotiables? And
Yep.
then they can go, actually, I'm not going to bother you with this one.
So much of this is expectation setting.
Yeah.
People will go above and beyond to give you what you need. And often it is not negotiables, right? It's like you need these things. They cannot pass go until they've done this stuff
Yeah.
at certain points. But typically they don't find out that that's something you need until the 11th hour.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes painful. So the earlier, this is shift left, right? The earlier that we can put these, give visibility to what the process is and set expectations, the better that will be all along. And they will proactively do that themselves. So with your pre-flight checks, we talk about UpGuard, we do similar stuff. There's lots and lots of platforms out there. Everyone's kind of using something. Or write your own, right? It's like vibe something up. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that it's reflective of the things you're not negotiables. And if you can empower your business representatives or the organisations who, the individuals who are going out finding these innovative solutions with the checks and the things to look for and automate that for them. And so they can just go, I'm looking at these guys, and they get a report, and then they can pre-qualify in and out, right? They already know, again, the traffic light's really key for that. That's why I simplify it down to that. They know that's a green light, so when they get to you or your team, it's going to be reasonably clear sailing, or there's some red flags here, it's going to be a real shit show, or we're in the amber space where, just prepare for that. It's not, it might be easy for you to buy it. It's like $5 a month or whatever it might be, but it's going to be like $50,000 worth of assurance process that you need to get through, right? So just help them to appreciate that as early as possible.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
No worries.
All right, we have time for one more question. Awesome.
What would be a good resource for a department, like a cyber department, to budget for the effort and volume of work, and also like the crown jewels, like how much should be tiered?
Like
one?
50 people, $1 million. I'm not sure. It's a fantastic question. It's very difficult to answer. We should probably sort of dig into that a little bit more for you. But my philosophy is you probably, in all reality, this is a bit of a grudge spend for organisations, right? It's a compliance tick boxy thing. They don't want to do this because they don't appreciate the risk and the value it can provide them with. So I wholeheartedly believe that by implementing and being a little bit more flexible and adoptive of smaller organisations, it will pay for itself commercially because you'll get more diverse applications and competitive pressure and risk reductions and things like that. But that's a whole business case, right? You need to be able to work with people who understand how to do that. In the absence of that, it's challenging. They're going to be the levers that will allow you to increase your budget to do that. How am I going to... They're going to just be, how do I get more through, which reduces risk, but do it cheaper, right? And this can be done cheaper. I believe it doesn't need any more resources. We just need to be thinking a little bit more about it. How can we document things? How do we translate it into plain language? How do we, again, shift left, put expectations all the way up front instead of waiting till the end? A big thing I sort of do with our partners is, hey, whenever you send an email out or you acknowledge someone's registered for the EOI process, just throw them over here with some resources where they can start to prepare. Now, they may never even apply for the EOI process, but that doesn't cost you anything and it points them in the right direction. So, take some examples here. Again, security awareness team. Just ask them to go do something with your suppliers instead of internal resources. You don't necessarily need to do massive investments with this type of stuff. But look, I mean, my business is based on this. So, there's certainly people out there who are willing and would like to partner and assist if these are the sorts of challenges that you have. Every single one of these, I realise this is a bit of a whirlwind. Every single one of these things is a talk in and of themselves. So yeah, please grab me or connect with me on LinkedIn and we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you, Amber. I think everyone's off for lunch now, is it?
Yep, that's correct. Everyone's off for lunch, but thank you so much for your time, Adam. I'm glad I'm just an NPC in this world.
Excellent. No worries. Thanks, everyone.